The sledgehammer crashed through the pool's concrete edge as Sarah Martinez delivered the final blow to her backyard oasis. 20 years of memories shattered with each strike. Her children's first swimming lessons, birthday parties, quiet summer evenings. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. Her neighbor Karen Whitman emerged from behind the fence like a woman possessed, her face twisted with rage, phone already dialing 911. "You've destroyed everything!" Karen screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "You have no idea what you've just done." As sirens wailed in the distance, Sarah realized this wasn't about a pool at all. It was about a secret that would tear their quiet suburban street apart forever. The demolition crew had left 3 hours ago, but Sarah Martinez couldn't stop staring at the gaping wound in her backyard. What had once been a pristine 20x 40-foot swimming pool now resembled a concrete crater, filled with chunks of broken tile and twisted metal. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the destruction, making it look even more apocalyptic. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Sarah turned to find her 17-year-old daughter Emma standing in the doorway, her arms crossed and face etched with concern. Behind her, 14-year-old Jake peered over her shoulder, his eyes wide with the same mixture of confusion and worry that had plagued both kids since Sarah announced her decision 2 weeks ago. "I'm sure, Miha," Sarah said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "We need a fresh start." It was a lie, of course. The real reason the pool had to go was sitting in her nightstand drawer, a stack of medical bills that grew thicker each week, each one stamped with the cruel red ink of final. Notice, David's cancer treatment had drained their savings, maxed out their credit cards, and turned their comfortable middle-class life into a daily struggle for survival. The pool was the only asset they had left to liquidate. "But Dad loved that pool," Jake said quietly, his voice cracking slightly. "He taught me how to dive right there, remember?" Off the deep end, Sarah's chest tightened. David had been gone 8 months now, but his presence still lingered everywhere, especially around the pool where he'd spent countless hours teaching the kids to swim, hosting barbecues, and holding Sarah close during those terrible nights when the chemo made sleep impossible. "Your father would understand," she said, turning back to the wreckage. "He'd want us to do whatever it takes to keep the house." The sound of a gate slamming made all 3 of them jump. Sarah looked up to see Karen Whitman marching across her pristine lawn, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the sunlight, her face flushed with indignation. At 52, Karen maintained the aggressive fitness routine and designer wardrobe of someone half her age, but right now she looked every bit the suburban warrior preparing for battle. "Sarah!" Karen's voice carried across the fence line like a battle cry. "What the hell have you done?" Sarah felt her stomach drop. She'd been dreading this confrontation for weeks, ever since she'd submitted the demolition permits. Karen had been their neighbor for 12 years, and while they'd never been close, they'd maintained the polite distance that kept suburban life bearable. But Sarah had suspected this day would come. "I removed my pool, Karen," Sarah called back, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's my property." Karen reached the fence line and gripped the wooden slats with both hands, her knuckles white with tension. "You can't just destroy property that affects the entire neighborhood. Do you have any idea what you've done to our property values?" "Our property values?" Sarah felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "Karen, my husband died. I'm trying to keep my family from losing our home. I don't give a damn about property values right now." "Well, you should." Karen's voice rose to a pitch that made Emma and Jake exchange worried glances. "Richard and I spent $40,000 landscaping our backyard specifically to complement your pool area. We installed that expensive pergola, the outdoor kitchen, the professional lighting, all of it designed to create a cohesive aesthetic with your pool as the centerpiece." Sarah stared at her neighbor in disbelief. "You're upset because your backyard doesn't match mine anymore?" "It's not about matching," Karen shrieked, her composure completely gone now. "It's about property values. It's about neighborhood standards. It's about—" She stopped abruptly, her face cycling through several emotions before settling on something that looked almost desperate. You can't just make decisions that affect everyone without consulting the homeowners association. There is no homeowners association, Karen. This isn't a planned community. There should be. There needs to be oversight. Someone needs to stop people from making impulsive decisions that ruin everything. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. A wall that had been holding back months of grief, stress, and barely contained rage. Impulsive, she repeated, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think this was impulsive? She walked to the fence, stopping just inches from Karen's flushed face. Up close, she could see the perfect makeup, the Botox-smooth forehead, the expensive dental work that had probably cost more than Sarah's monthly mortgage payment. I agonized over this decision for months, Sarah continued, her voice growing, stronger with each word. I lay awake every night trying to figure out how to pay my bills. I've sold everything else. David's car, my wedding ring, furniture that's been in my family for generations. The pool was the last thing I had left to sell, and you're standing here complaining about your property values. Karen's grip on the fence tightened. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. Sarah's control finally snapped. My husband worked 2 jobs to pay for that pool. He installed every tile by hand, spent weekends teaching our kids to swim in it, floated on a raft in the shallow end when the chemo made him too weak to walk. And I had to destroy it because the medical bills are crushing us, and we're 3 months behind on the mortgage. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't care. The words kept coming, pulled from some deep well of pain she'd been trying to ignore. So forgive me if I don't give a shit about your pergola or your outdoor kitchen or your perfect suburban aesthetic. I'm trying to survive, Karen. I'm trying to keep my kids in their home and their schools and some semblance of the life their father wanted them to have. Karen stepped back from the fence, but her expression didn't soften. If anything, she looked more agitated, her eyes darting between Sarah and the demolished pool like she was calculating something. You should have discussed this with the neighbors, she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. There are procedures. There are ways to handle these things that don't impact everyone else. Procedures? Sarah laughed bitterly. You want to know about procedures, Karen. Let me tell you about procedures. There's a procedure for watching your husband die slowly while medical bills pile up. There's a procedure for explaining to your kids why they can't have new school clothes. There's a procedure for choosing between groceries and electricity payments. Emma appeared at Sarah's shoulder, her young face fierce with protective anger. Leave my mum alone, she said, her voice shaking but determined. She's been through enough. Karen's gaze shifted to Emma, and something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or recognition of how cruel she sounded. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by that desperate look Sarah had noticed earlier. This isn't over, Karen said, backing toward her house. There are rules. There are standards. There are... She paused, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. There are people who need to know about this. Who are you calling? Sarah asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. Karen's thumb was already moving across the screen. The police. Someone needs to document what you've done here. Someone needs to investigate whether proper permits were obtained, whether environmental regulations were followed, whether... I have all the permits, Sarah shouted, but Karen was already walking away, phone pressed to her ear. Sarah could hear fragments of the conversation as Karen moved across her lawn. Completely destroyed. Property damage, neighborhood disruption, needs immediate investigation. Jake appeared beside his mother and sister, his face pale. Mum, can she really call the cops on us for taking out our own pool? Sarah wrapped her arms around both her children, watching Karen pace her pristine lawn while gesticulating wildly into her phone. In the distance, she could hear the faint wail of sirens, though whether they were headed this way was impossible to tell. I don't know, baby, she whispered. I honestly don't know. But as she watched Karen's increasingly frantic phone conversation, Sarah realized this was about more than property values or neighborhood aesthetics. There was something else driving her neighbor's extreme reaction, something desperate and scared hiding behind all that suburban righteousness. The sirens were getting louder now, and Sarah felt the first cold fingers of real fear creeping up her spine. She'd been through hell and back over the past year, but somehow she sensed that her troubles were just beginning. Karen ended her call and stood facing them across the fence, her chest heaving with exertion or emotion. Sarah couldn't tell which, but there was a wild satisfaction in her eyes now, a vindicated gleam that made Sarah's blood run cold. "They're coming," Karen called out, her voice carrying. The first police cruiser pulled into Sarah's driveway, with its lights flashing but no siren, followed closely by a second patrol car. Sarah felt her children press closer to her sides as two officers emerged, a tall, angular woman with graying hair and a younger Hispanic man who looked barely out of the academy. The older officer approached first, her hand resting casually on her utility belt. "I'm Officer Martinez," she said, then paused with a slight smile. "No relation, I assume." "Sarah Martinez," Sarah replied, managing a weak smile in return. "And no, probably not." "I'm Officer Rodriguez," the younger man added, pulling out a small notebook. "We received a call about property destruction and possible permit violations. Can you walk us through what happened here?" Before Sarah could respond, Karen appeared at the fence line again, having apparently been waiting for this moment. She'd changed into a crisp white blouse and navy slacks, an outfit that suggested she'd been preparing for this confrontation. "Officers, thank you for coming so quickly," Karen called out, her voice now perfectly modulated and reasonable. Gone was the shrieking harridan from 30 minutes ago. In her place stood a concerned citizen with legitimate grievances. "I'm Karen Whitman. I live next door. I called because I'm concerned about the environmental impact and permit compliance of this demolition." Officer Martinez glanced between the two women, clearly assessing the situation. "Mrs. Martinez, do you have the permits for this work?" "Of course," Sarah said, grateful she'd kept all the paperwork organized. "They're inside. I can get them right now." "I'll come with you," Officer Rodriguez said. "Just standard procedure." As they walked toward the house, Sarah could hear Karen launching into what sounded like a prepared speech about property values and neighborhood standards. Emma and Jake followed behind, their faces etched with worry and confusion. Inside, Sarah retrieved the thick folder from her kitchen counter, her hands shaking slightly as she handed it over. Officer Rodriguez spread the documents across her dining room table, his expression professional and neutral. City demolition permit, environmental assessment, contractor licensing, he murmured, flipping through each document. "Everything looks in order here, Mrs. Martinez. When did you file these?" 3 weeks ago. The demolition was completed this morning by Ramirez Construction. They're fully licensed and bonded." Officer Rodriguez nodded, making notes. "Can I ask why you decided to remove the pool?" Sarah's throat tightened. "Financial reasons. My husband passed away 8 months ago, and the medical bills." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "I'm sorry for your loss," Rodriguez said gently. "And I'm sorry you're dealing with this situation on top of everything else." They returned outside to find Officer Martinez listening to Karen with growing impatience. Sarah caught the tail end of Karen's monologue. Completely irresponsible to make such drastic changes without consulting neighbors who will be directly impacted by the aesthetic and financial consequences. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez interrupted, "while I understand your concerns, Mrs. Martinez has all the proper permits. The demolition was done legally on her own property." Karen's composed facade cracked slightly. "But surely there are noise ordinances, environmental regulations about concrete disposal. What about the chemicals from the pool? Where did those go?" Officer Rodriguez consulted his notes. "The environmental assessment shows proper chemical neutralization and disposal. The concrete is being recycled at an approved facility. All work was done during permitted hours." "This can't be right," Karen said, her voice rising again. "There has to be something, some regulation, some oversight." "Mrs. Whitman," Officer Martinez said firmly, "I need you to calm down. Your neighbor has done nothing illegal." Sarah watched Karen's face cycle through several emotions: frustration, disbelief, and something that looked almost like panic. There was definitely more to this story than property values. "What about the impact on the drainage?" Karen said suddenly, grasping at straws. "That pool held thousands of gallons of water. Now where does the rainwater go? What if it floods my basement?" "The city engineer signed off on the drainage plan," Officer Rodriguez replied patiently. "The lot will be regraded and properly landscaped." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the arrival of a white BMW sedan that pulled up behind the patrol cars. A man in an expensive suit climbed out, his face grim with purpose. "Richard," Sarah heard Karen call out, and there was relief in her voice. "Richard, tell them about the covenant." Richard Whitman strode across the lawn with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. At 55, he had the silver-haired gravitas of a successful businessman, complete with gold watch and Italian leather, shoes that probably cost more than Sarah made in a month. "Officers," he said, extending his hand to Officer Martinez. "Richard Whitman, attorney. I live next door, and I believe there may be some legal issues with this demolition that need to be addressed." Sarah felt her stomach drop. An attorney, of course. "What kind of legal issues, Mr. Whitman?" Officer Martinez asked, though her tone suggested she was already tired of this situation. Richard pulled out his phone and scrolled through what appeared to be a document. When this neighborhood was developed in 1987, all property owners signed a covenant agreeing to maintain certain standards. Swimming pools were specifically mentioned as a neighborhood amenity that contributes to overall property values. "Let me see that," Officer Rodriguez said, extending his hand. Richard hesitated for just a moment, so briefly that Sarah almost missed it. "I don't have the physical document with me, but I can have my office send over a copy within the hour." "Dad, what covenant?" Emma spoke up suddenly. "We bought this house 12 years ago, and nobody ever mentioned any covenant." Richard's smile was condescending. "Young lady, these are complex legal matters that—" "She's right," Sarah interrupted, finding her voice. "David and I never signed any covenant. Our real estate attorney would have told us about any restrictions." "The covenant would have been part of the original deed restrictions," Richard said smoothly. "It applies to all properties regardless of when they were purchased." Officer Martinez looked skeptical. "Mr. Whitman, if such a covenant exists, it would be a civil matter, not a criminal one. We can't enforce deed restrictions, but surely you can investigate whether proper notification was given to affected neighbors," Richard pressed. "Whether environmental impact studies were adequate. Whether—" "Mr. Whitman," Officer Rodriguez said, closing his notebook with a sharp snap. "Your neighbor has complied with all city ordinances and permit requirements. If you believe there's a civil matter regarding deed restrictions, you'll need to pursue that through the courts." Sarah watched Richard's face flush with frustration. Behind him, Karen looked like she was about to cry or explode. The desperation in her eyes was even more pronounced now. "This is ridiculous," Karen burst out. "She's destroyed 20 years of neighborhood harmony. She's ruined everything we've worked for." "Karen," Richard said sharply, "calm down." But Karen was past listening. "You don't understand. That pool, it was—" She stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth as if she'd almost said something she shouldn't. Officer Martinez stepped closer. "Ma'am, what were you about to say?" Karen shook her head violently. "Nothing. I just meant that it was a beautiful addition to the neighborhood. It brought us all together." Sarah studied her neighbor's face, noting the way Karen's eyes kept darting toward her own backyard, then to Richard, then back to the demolished pool. There was definitely something she wasn't saying. "Mrs. Whitman," Officer Martinez said gently, "is there something else going on here? Because your reaction seems disproportionate to a neighbor removing their pool." "Of course there's something else," Karen exploded. "She's being selfish and inconsiderate and—" She was spiraling again, her carefully constructed composure crumbling completely. "Karen," Richard's voice cracked like a whip, That's enough! The sharp command in his tone made everyone freeze. Sarah noticed that Richard's face had gone pale, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Whitman, is there something you'd like to tell us?" Richard forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Not at all, officer. My wife is just upset about the neighborhood changes. You know how women can get emotional about these things." The condescending comment hung in the air like a bad smell. Sarah saw Officer Martinez's expression harden, and even Jake rolled his eyes. "Right," Officer Martinez said dryly. "Well, unless there's an actual crime to investigate here, I think we're done." "Wait," Karen called out desperately. "What about the noise complaints? The disruption to the neighborhood? Surely there's something—" "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said patiently, "the work was done during permitted hours with proper permits. There's nothing illegal about removing a pool from your own property." As the officers began walking back to their patrol cars, Sarah heard Karen whisper urgently to Richard, "You have to do something. You have to stop this." Richard's response was too quiet to hear, but his face was grim as he watched the police cars pull away. He said something else to Karen that made her face crumple, then turned and walked back to his BMW without another word. Karen stood alone by the fence, staring at the